The traveller had been on the road since dawn. The dust on his cloak clung to sweat that had dried and risen again along the long slopes of the Phrygian highlands. Ahead lay a Roman milestone carved with a distance measure to the next station. The stone glowed pale in the rising heat. Wagon wheels rattled somewhere behind him. The smell of pack animals drifted across the road. As he walked, he carried a leather satchel tight against his side. Inside it lay a letter that would travel farther than him, copied again and again, passing from city to city until no one could remember the name of the courier who first delivered it. This was the landscape of Paul's journeys. A network of roads engineered for armies, merchants, and officials. The roads had been designed to hold the empire together, not to spread a new message, yet they became channels for words that would reshape the beliefs of communities across Asia Minor and Greece. When those words reached certain cities, everything from local synagogue life to civic identity was pushed into new patterns of conflict or adaptation. Roman administrators observed the commotion. Local judges heard complaints. Some cities ignored the movement, while others were drawn into disputes that lasted for years. Along these roads, the map of belief began to shift, not through force, but through repeated conversations in workshops, port markets, synagogues, and private homes. The world Paul entered was already layered with movement. Roman legions marched along these same roads in earlier generations. Traders brought textiles from the Euphrates and pottery from Campania. Imperial couriers could travel astonishing distances by using station houses supplied with fresh animals. Cities in Asia Minor and Greece depended on these networks for grain shipments, legal petitions, and diplomatic communication. For most travelers, the journey between cities involved planning routes based on water availability, shelter, and the political stability of a given district. For Paul, it meant choosing the paths most likely to place him before audiences capable of sustaining a community. Paul's background allowed him to stand at a rare intersection of cultures. He knew the synagogue world and its rhythms of scripture, prayer, and debate. He also knew the Greek urban world where artisans worked within guilds, where philosophers spoke in porticos, and where civic councils handled local disputes. Roman provincial law created another structure around these worlds. Governors moved through territories on set schedules. Cities managed their own internal affairs unless conflict threatened order. Some scholars conclude that Paul's ability to navigate all these levels was exceptional. Others argue that he was one of many bilingual or trilingual Jews who adapted naturally to life across the eastern Mediterranean. Whatever the case, he operated inside a legal and cultural framework built by the empire, yet used by him for entirely different ends. When Paul first traveled into Asia Minor, he followed routes that armies generations earlier had carved through mountains and valleys. Roman engineers had cut stone channels into cliffs, drained marshes, and established bridges that linked regions previously isolated by terrain. These roads were not smooth by modern standards, but for the ancient world they provided unmatched stability. A determined traveller could reach major centres in predictable stages. Inns, though variable in quality, gave shelter. In more settled regions, travellers could stay with sympathetic households or within commercial courtyards attached to workshops. Paul's letters mention labour with his own hands, which allowed him to support himself in cities where finances or suspicion made full patronage impossible. Leatherwork and tent-making gave mobility. Workshops often opened onto the street, creating an informal space for discussion. Here, questions moved rapidly. Travelling merchants wanted to know why certain teachings seemed distinct from synagogue patterns. Gentiles asked how they fit within a story rooted in Israel's scriptures. Members of synagogue communities debated how the inclusion of Gentiles affected purity regulations. These questions formed the core of early urban gatherings. They did not arise from theoretical interest alone. They emerged from real economic partnerships, social obligations, and kinship expectations. The Roman provincial system provided both opportunity and danger. When disputes stayed within a synagogue, city officials usually allowed them to continue as internal matters. But when street unrest occurred, provincial authorities responded quickly. The empire prized stability in its cities. Any movement that disrupted trade or threatened civic unity could face expulsion. Paul's repeated removals from certain regions reflected this structure. Some scholars conclude that he became known among city magistrates for provoking conflict. Others argue that Paul was targeted by local groups who sought to prevent new interpretations of Scripture. Regardless of motive, each removal forced Paul to reconsider his route, shaping the eventual spread of his message. Synagogues across the empire varied widely. Some were small gatherings in rented homes, others stood as established public institutions with inscriptions marking donors. Many welcomed Gentile supporters known as God-fearers. These individuals admired Israel's devotion without fully adopting all identity markers of Jewish law. They formed a crucial link in Paul's strategy. Their familiarity with Scripture and their connections in trade networks allowed teachings to travel along commercial lines far beyond their cities. In some regions, these Gentile sympathizers became early adopters of Paul's message, creating mixed communities that required careful guidance. Paul's letters reflect the challenge of holding such diverse groups together. When Paul entered Greek cities like Thessalonica, Corinth, and Athens, he encountered different social pressures. Greek philosophical traditions shaped expectations of public argument. Stoics and Epicureans debated ethics in open forums. Traveling teachers moved from city to city, offering instruction for payment. In such environments, Paul's refusal to charge fees marked him as unusual. Some citizens viewed this with suspicion, assuming hidden motives. Others saw it as a sign of integrity. In cities where honor and reputation guided public life, a teacher without patronage had to demonstrate credibility in other ways. Paul did so by staying within households, building relationships, and providing counsel on disputes that threatened internal cohesion. Roman legal categories shaped the reception of Paul's message in crucial ways. The empire recognized ancestral customs as protected practices. Jewish communities fell under this protection. But once Gentiles became central to Paul's assemblies, the question of classification arose. Were these groups still part of the Jewish umbrella of permitted customs, or were they forming a new association? Roman authorities monitored informal associations carefully, since they sometimes served as bases for political agitation. Paul's communities had to avoid any appearance of insurrection. His letters often advised quiet conduct, mutual respect, and responsible citizenship. These instructions were not abstract, they were strategies for survival within a system suspicious of uncontrolled gatherings. As Paul moved through Asia Minor, each city left its mark on him. In Pisidian Antioch, synagogue debates shaped his early approach to scriptural reasoning. In Iconium, mixed responses led to citywide tension. In Lystra, a miracle report caused local residents to interpret him through their own mythological frameworks, revealing how cultural expectations filtered every message. In Troas, a vision prompted a shift westward into Macedonia. For ancient travelers, such a crossing was significant. Moving from Asia Minor to Europe placed Paul within regions where Greek civic identity and Roman administration intertwined more tightly. Macedonia held strategic importance in the empire. Its cities lay along the Via Egnatia, a major road linking the Adriatic to the Aegean. Travelers from Italy, Greece, and Asia Minor passed constantly through its stations. When Paul addressed communities along this route, his words encountered populations accustomed to cultural diversity and political negotiation. Soldiers, merchants, sailors, and officials all contributed to a dynamic urban environment. This mixture allowed ideas to travel quickly. Letters could be carried by traders. Reports could reach distant assemblies within weeks. Such circulation explains how Paul's teachings spread even when he was absent from a city for extended periods. In Thessalonica, political tension emerged rapidly. Public accusations implied that Paul's message challenged imperial loyalty. Such charges carried severe implications. City leaders faced pressure to demonstrate allegiance to Rome. They acted swiftly, forcing Paul and his companions to leave. Yet the community remained, continuing to meet and to navigate the same environment without its founder. Paul's later correspondence to them shows concern for their endurance and relief that they continued despite civic pressure. When Paul reached Athens, he encountered a city proud of its intellectual traditions. Philosophers engaged him in discussion, some dismissed him politely, others showed curiosity. In this context, Paul reframed his message to address an audience steeped in the language of natural philosophy. His approach did not abandon his foundations in Israel's scriptures, but he adjusted the points of connection. This flexibility became essential as he moved deeper into Greece. Corinth presented a different challenge. Its population included freedmen, merchants, sailors, and officials. The city's economy depended on trade and on the port traffic passing through its harbors. Wealth and poverty existed side by side. Social divisions shaped daily life. Paul's long stay here produced one of his most complex communities. Assemblies met in homes belonging to individuals of different status levels. The arrangement created tensions. Wealthier members expected recognition, poorer members sought inclusion. Conflicts over meals, lawsuits, and moral expectations emerged. Paul's letters to Corinth show a leader trying to hold a fragmented group together in a city where public display and honor shaped every decision. Roman courts played a background role in Corinth. Local judges, known as proconsuls, oversaw major cases. The presence of these officials influenced how communities behaved. Any dispute that spilled into public space risked drawing official attention. When Paul himself faced charges, the proconsul dismissed the case as an internal dispute among Jews. This dismissal created a precedent. It showed that Roman authorities did not view Paul's teachings as a civil threat. Such rulings helped future communities avoid legal crises. As Paul continued his journeys, networks formed around him. Some individuals traveled with him for part of a route. Others remained in cities to support local assemblies. These networks allowed information to move quickly. When Paul wrote a letter, a courier could carry it to a city where trusted individuals ensured its delivery and eventual copying. Letters instructed communities on how to live, how to resolve disputes, and how to interpret events in light of shared beliefs. Over time, certain letters were collected together, forming small clusters that circulated independently of Paul's presence. Paul's group did not operate like later ecclesiastical structures. There was no central archive, no standardized format for copying letters, and no formal hierarchy. Instead, the network resembled a web of loosely connected communities sharing correspondence, visits, and mutual support. This structure mirrored the pattern of philosophical schools and voluntary associations across the Greek world. It also meant that Paul's influence spread through relationships rather than through institutions. The heart of Paul's impact came from his engagement with both synagogue audiences and Gentile seekers. In synagogues, debate revolved around scripture and tradition. Arguments focused on interpretation, lineage, and covenant identity. Among Gentiles, questions often related to lifestyle, ethics, and social obligations. Paul had to address both worlds with clarity. His letters reveal the strain this produced. He encouraged unity between groups that had historically remained separate. He argued for inclusion while acknowledging the depth of Jewish tradition. This dual focus allowed his message to cross cultural boundaries that many thought impassable. Every major city on Paul's routes contained competing loyalties. Civic cults honored local gods and the emperor. Trade guilds held feasts tied to patron deities. Families expected participation in household rituals. Gentile converts faced pressure from relatives and employers. Jewish members faced pressure from within their own communities, especially when Gentile inclusion challenged traditional norms. Paul's letters often addressed these pressures directly. He offered guidance but also recognized that each city required distinct solutions. The result was a body of correspondence that held together diverse communities across varied environments. Roman legal protections shaped the movement's survival. While the empire could be harsh toward perceived threats, it also offered stability. Cities with strong Roman administration often protected minority groups. Roads enabled travel. Postal routes allowed letters to move. The empire unintentionally created the infrastructure that allowed Paul's teachings to spread across thousands of miles. Some scholars conclude that without Roman roads and provincial order, Paul's impact would have remained local. Others argue that the movement's internal cohesion ensured its persistence even in less stable regions. When Paul returned to Jerusalem after years of travel, he entered a city where tensions ran high. The temple authorities monitored groups considered disruptive. Roman troops garrisoned the city. Pilgrims from across the empire arrived for festivals. The atmosphere was volatile. Paul's presence caused rumors. Some believed he disregarded the law. Others accused him of undermining traditional boundaries. His arrest reflected the complex intersection of Roman authority, local suspicion, and the charged environment of the festival season. This event removed him from his networks physically, but not through correspondence. Letters continued to circulate. In some cases, imprisonment increased interest in his teachings. Paul's eventual journey to Rome brought him to the center of the empire. The imperial capital contained large immigrant populations, multiple synagogues, and numerous voluntary associations. Here, teachings spread quickly through dense social networks. Paul's arrival, even under guard, placed him within reach of communities already familiar with some elements of his message. The city served as both an endpoint of his travels and a new origin point for further dissemination. As years passed, the map of belief changed. Communities Paul visited became centers of further growth. Letters he wrote to address specific issues gained new relevance in different settings. Couriers carried them to new regions. Scribes copied them with careful attention. Assemblies read them aloud, applied them to their own situations, and preserved them for future generations. Other teachers wrote letters as well, but not all survived. Paul's writings endured because communities valued them, circulated them, and considered them essential for understanding their shared identity. The spread of these teachings did not erase local cultures. Instead, it created a network of communities united by shared texts, shared practices, and shared memory of Paul's visits. The result resembled both a religious movement and a social network. Each community remained rooted in its local context, yet linked to others across the empire. Paul's journeys produced more than geographical movement. They created intellectual and relational structures. They linked cities across Asia Minor, Greece, and eventually Italy into a network shaped by debates, instructions, and shared narratives. These networks persisted even after Paul's death. Later generations developed new leadership structures, new writings, and new forms of worship. But Paul's foundational work shaped the vocabulary, ethics, and communal identity that held the movement together as it expanded. The roads Paul walked eventually carried officials, soldiers, and merchants who had heard rumors of communities reading his letters. Some visited out of curiosity, others observed them for administrative reasons. Over time, the existence of these communities became normal within provincial life. The map of belief had shifted. Cities where Paul once faced conflict now contained established assemblies. Regions where he spent only a few weeks developed traditions that lasted centuries. When later Christians looked back, they saw in Paul's journeys a pattern of purpose. They viewed the roots as part of a larger plan. Modern scholars examining archaeology, inscriptions, and provincial records see a different picture. They see a traveler adapting to conditions, responding to opportunities, and navigating complex social landscapes. Both perspectives acknowledge the scale of the impact. By moving along Roman roads, engaging both synagogue and Gentile audiences, and building communities through correspondence, Paul reshaped the religious geography of the Mediterranean world. Paul did not redraw the map through conquest or political office. He redrew it through relationships, arguments, and perseverance. His journeys formed corridors of belief, stretching from Judea to the Aegean, from the highlands of Anatolia to the streets of Rome. These corridors outlasted empires. They became pathways along which later generations continued to walk, carrying texts first delivered in fragile satchels across sunlit roads carved by Roman engineers. The reflection reveals a simple pattern. Infrastructure built for empire allowed ideas to outrun armies. Urban diversity allowed debates to cross cultural boundaries. Roman law, while unpredictable, often protected the movement long enough for it to root itself. Paul's ability to connect synagogue tradition with Gentile interest created a form of teaching that traveled effectively. His letters, shaped by specific moments, acquired lasting relevance. The map of belief shifted because communication and mobility aligned with ideas capable of crossing social and ethnic lines. The closing view returns to the traveler with the satchel. He disappears over a ridge on the Phrygian road, walking toward a city whose name he may not remember in old age. The letter he carries will long outlive him. It will be copied, read aloud, debated, and preserved. It will move from city to city, forming invisible lines across the empire. Those lines, drawn by countless steps on Roman stone, redrew the spiritual landscape of the Mediterranean. They remain visible today to anyone who traces the origins of the communities shaped by Paul's long and restless movement across the ancient world.